to the Oxon Hill Branch of the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. I am Lenny Diggs. I'm the South Area Director, and I'm so glad to see all of your faces here tonight. So glad you're so interested in learning more about Len Bias and the book, Lessons from Lenny, The Journey Beyond a Shooting Star, by our authors who are here tonight, Tony Massenburg and Walt Williams. Let's give them a hand. You know, when our new outreach specialist told us that we could host this event tonight, I was just so elated, Tony and Walt. I mean, because I grew up in Baltimore City, and I remember Len Bias playing for the University of Maryland. I was so excited when I had the opportunity now to introduce this program and to interview you as well. So let's talk about who you are, okay? Here's some introductions. Let's see. Tony Massenburg is the only Terrapin to play for legendary coaches Charles Lefty, Driesell, Bob Wade, and Gary Williams. He graduated from the University of Maryland, and after 13 record-setting NBA seasons, is now a Maryland business owner and an analyst for Monumental Sports Network and NBC Sports Washington. Yes, Walt Williams, who's sitting next to him, was a Crossland High School All-Star who wanted to be like Len, it says. After graduating from the University of Maryland, he played 11 seasons in the NBA. Walt was inducted into the University of Maryland Athletics Hall of Fame in 2003 and the Washington, D.C. Sports Hall of Fame in 2018. He now talks Terps for the Maryland Sports Radio Network and is a guest analyst for NBC Sports Washington. Let's give them a hand. Now, I've got to tell you about Len Bias. Now, how many people in here really remember Len Bias? Let me see your hand. All right. And how many basketball enthusiasts do we have? How many rising stars? All right. I see you. All right. Len Bias is considered by many as one of the greatest college basketball players of all time. Bias grew up in Prince George's County, and attended Northwestern High School. He was a two-time ACC Player of the Year and an All-American at the University of Maryland. The Boston Celtics selected Bias as the number 2 pick in the 1986 draft. And 2 days later, at the age of 22, he died from cocaine intoxication while partying with friends. Since then, he's been inducted into the University of Maryland Athletics Hall of Fame, Washington Metropolitan Basketball Hall of Fame, and most recently, in 2021, the National Collegiate Basketball Hall of Fame. So he definitely was a star and is a star. So we're just going to talk and have a conversation with Tony and Walt. You know, just so pleased to have you here, and we have some questions that we already prepared, and so we're just going to move right along to them. Now, the first question I had was, Tony, you were Len's teammate, and Walt, I think you, the book said you were 16 years old when you heard of Len's passing away. So I want to know, can you tell us how Len Bias influenced you in your youth?
For me, I grew up in Southern Virginia, about almost 3 hours south of here. And so we're so far south in part of Virginia, I grew up right outside of Petersburg, that there are a lot of Carolina fans, University of North Carolina fans in my part of Virginia. And so as a kid, you know, in junior high and then into, you know, early part of high school, you know, my favorite player at that time was Dr. J, Judy Zerk. And so everybody, you know, loved the doctor, and you know, Kareem and Magic, and, you know, they were, you know, kind of the guys at that time in the NBA. And in college basketball, you know, the ACC was acknowledged as the best conference in all of college basketball at that time. I'm talking the 80s. There was no question where the best college basketball was being played. It was in the ACC. And so I grew up watching ACC basketball. I was initially a North Carolina fan because, like I said, we grew up so far, you know, south of almost right with 20 minutes like north of the North Carolina state line. And so my high school coach was also from North Carolina, coaching in Virginia, and he was a big Carolina fan. So we actually ran Dean Smith's University of Maryland, University of North Carolina's offense. So for probably up to about my sophomore year, I was a Carolina fan. Michael Jordan, Sam Perkins, James Worthy, Dean Smith, great coach. And then I see the ACC tournament, this dynamic sophomore from the University of Maryland that's like shooting jump shots like a guard. He's 6'8", he's strong, he's jumping higher than anybody in the gym, and he's dunking on people. And so as a young player, I was enamored, with his physical skill set and the way he played the game and how well he could shoot the basketball at 6'8", because at that time, guys that were that tall didn't shoot the basketball outside the way that we see guys shooting it now. So Len Bias was a one-of-a-kind basketball player, even then during the, what we call the glory years of basketball in the 80s and 90s. And so I wanted to emulate that. I wanted to be Len Bias. I wanted to be like Len Bias. And so I go to camp and, I finally started getting some recognition at five-star basketball camp, which is where all the top high school basketball players went, because nobody really knew me at the time outside of Virginia, because no internet in 1983, 84. And so word didn't travel about you, and then I was in a small town. I was not in Washington, D.C., where, the word would have traveled bigger in the big city. So being, from a small town, I was enamored with Bias in the University of Maryland. And so when I got the opportunity to be recruited by Lefty Driesell, whom I met at that camp, after being a standout, the country boy shows up and then walks away, as a better player than what people thought. So I wasn't known when I went to camp, but I was more known by the time I left. And I got the attention of the one school that I really wanted, and that was the University of Maryland. So when I met Lefty, it was like a dream. And he talked to me and told me about how much I reminded him of like Buck Williams. Son, you can be an All-American like Len Bias. Len Bias. I was like, yeah, coach, of course I know Len Bias, But I didn't want to lead on how much I was enamored with Maryland and Len Bias and how I really wanted to go to Maryland. Like, I really wanted to go to Maryland. So I went through the recruiting process and eventually chose Maryland and got to meet Len Bias on my visit and go around campus and just to fast forward to my freshman year of playing with him, it was a dream come true. I got, if you can imagine, everybody knows how much the late, great Kobe Bryant idolized Michael Jordan. And if you could imagine if Kobe had gotten a chance, in a time machine to go to college, to UNC, play with Michael Jordan, that's what it was like for me being able to go to University of Maryland and play with Len Bias. So when I got that year to play with him, I learned his work ethic. I learned why he was great. I learned that it wasn't just God-given ability that he had, because he had a ton of that, but it was also his work ethic and his drive. And I also got to embrace the person as a big brother, as a leader on our team, and as a positive role model. He did things on the basketball court that I've never seen. I mean, to this day, I've still never seen some of the stuff after 13 years of playing in the NBA, 2 in Europe. I can honestly sit here and say in 2022 that still to this day, I have never played with, played against, or seen another player like Len Bias.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Well,
For me, I grew up right down the street, like 5-10 minutes down the street. So as a kid, I grew up a Georgetown Hoya fan. John Thompson and those squads.
Yeah.
And so my dad, he was a North Carolina Tar Heel fan, and so he thought that he was taking me to a North Carolina game, but that particular night they happened to be playing University of Maryland, and I got an opportunity to see Len Bias in person. And just watching the game, and I remember like it was yesterday, the first time I saw him raise up to shoot that jump shot, and it was the prettiest thing I had ever saw. So I'd ever seen, and so yeah. And I started to gravitate to that. Next thing you know, I started to watch highlights, turf highlights all the time, and so it wasn't so much that I was a turf fan. It was I was a Len Bias fan, but I liked him so much that he made me a turf fan. And I remember in playing pickup games in the back of Benjamin Started down the street there. And,
Our audience knows.
yeah, oh yeah, and you know, it's just a crowd of people out. You don't see that too much anymore. You don't see the kids out there playing the pickup games, but there used to be so many people out there. It was unreal. So you understood that if you lost, I mean, you gotta get on your bike and ride to another court somewhere, see if you can get on somewhere else. But I remember, you know, before the game would start, you would yell out who you want to pretend to be that particular game. And all the time I used to yell, I'm Len Bias, you know. And I remembered that when it was time for me to make my decision and what school I wanted to go to. I remembered that part. You know, I wanted the kids from this community. I wanted the kids where I grew up at. I wanted them to go out in the back of Benjamin Starr and pretend like they were me.
Yeah.
You know, and so that meant something to me. It was impressionable, and that's what I set out to do. And I thought that the only place that I could accomplish that was at the University of Maryland. And you know, my sister was already there. My friends and family here, and I just wanted the opportunity to play in front of them, but also just, you know, following Len's footsteps. So that was my main goal. I knew the impression that he made on me and how I saw the University of Maryland, and I wanted to do the same.
Wow, yeah, you all just brought back memories. You know, those basketball names, like you never forget, you know, University of North Carolina. My family lives in North Carolina, and there's always, you know, the big, you know, showdown, the championship, Carolina and Duke, right? So, you know, all those names, wow, just brought back memories. Can you share, I know you talked about a little bit, Walt and Tony, can you share, Tony, some more experiences of just being at University of Maryland? How was that experience playing basketball?
Like I said, my freshman year was a dream. You know, it was like, you know, when you played with a guy that great, that was my first time being around a quote unquote real superstar. I mean, you know, straight from the country and like hadn't been a lot of places, hadn't seen much. I just saw Len Bias and the rest of the University of Maryland on TV. And the same thing with the, you know, the guys from Carolina. But I loved ACC basketball, but I loved the University of Maryland the most out of all the ACC schools. And Len Bias was my favorite player in the ACC, even over Michael Jordan and everybody else. When I saw Len, that was it for me. So that's what I wanted to be. And so that freshman year, you know, one of the biggest games that I remember is when we beat Carolina for the first time in the new Dean Dome. The Dean Dome was new at that time, and they had played in it 2 years and had never lost a game. And we had an big ACC game. I forget what month it was, but it was a big ACC game between Maryland and UNC, and Len Bias put on a show. I tell people, because, you know, kids, you know, people don't have time to go back and look up everything that Lenny was able to do.
Right.
But if you want to really get a good idea, an overall picture of who Len Bias really was, just Google that UNC Maryland game from 1986. You Google that game and you watch the show that he put on. That game to me exemplified his skills, his mindset, and the attitude and his approach to the game that was very, very similar to Michael Jordan. From an athletic standpoint, he was bigger and guy that jumps over 40 inches, you know, has a 40+ inch vertical jump, and you've got a 6'8" guy that has a 40+ vertical jump. I mean, you just think about that. So he was athletically as gifted as Michael Jordan, and he actually shot the basketball better from the outside than Michael Jordan, despite the fact that he was a forward and was, you know, 2 inches bigger. So you know, when you talk about what it was like playing, you know, my freshman year, like I said, that was a dream. After everything happened, it was a real adjustment for all of us. And, you know, again, enough people don't understand, you know, the decision that Walt had to make, because he was also, at the time, he was being recruited by Georgetown and UNC, okay? And he chose to come to the University of Maryland. I'll let him talk to you about that. Because, you know, when he came there, I immediately saw what, you know, what everybody else saw. I'd never seen Walt play, didn't know anything about it until he set foot on campus, on his visit. And then when I actually got to play with him, actually he had already signed. And so we got to kind of talk about our affection for Len Bias at that moment, because I didn't know, until he got here, that he really came to the University of Maryland because he was inspired by Len Bias.
So Walt, tell us more.
Yeah, well, Tony said it. For me, I was just trying to follow in those footsteps. After Bias' passing, it seemed like the University of Maryland had this negative connotation that went along with it. But that's not how I saw the university. And so it was this quest of mine that I wanted the country to see the University of Maryland the way I saw it. And so I worked my tail off. I went hard, and going through that process, what I realized is that, I had this fearlessness about me. I was being tested, and I had never backed down from anything. I wanted all of that, and reason why I think I was that way is because, I had that desire, to prove and to show the people what this area was all about, what the DMV was all about. That's why when I went to go out there and hoop, I always had high socks on because I wanted everybody to know where I was from, and I wanted them to see, how we ball out. And like I said, I had this fearlessness about me. My family, my friends, a lot of my family, we go to family reunions every year in North Carolina. Done.
Yes,
Fayetteville, in that area.
Right.
So I get an opportunity to be around my family and experience love from just a whole lot of people, and I didn't know this at the time, but unconsciously just gave me this sense of I can go after it, and it doesn't matter what happens out here. People are gonna love me no matter what. That made me fearless, and it made me want to follow in Len's footsteps. I know I know that we had a lot of obstacles against us, and I like I said, I wanted all that. I was prepared. I wanted to show everyone, especially this area, that we can do it. We can get it done on a high level, and it was great going through that. I wouldn't change that for the world, It allowed me to experience things at on a grand level, grand stage, and it was something that I was able to prove to myself that I can get anything done. I am a financial advisor. I've been one since 2009. This will be my 9th year being on the board for Blue Cross Blue Shield in the state of Maryland. I'm an entrepreneur. It's just a lot of things that I've been involved in, but every time that I've approached a situation, I always look at it as this is an opportunity for me to grow. I've never looked at problems or obstacles as that. I always looked at it as what's going to be the solution, how am I going to get it done? And I think I learned those things from going through the experiences at the University of Maryland and following behind someone like Len Bias.
I'm glad that's a good segue because we have a question about the chapter in the book called The Nightmare.
Yeah.
And, I think we need to deal with that. And, that morning after, what was going through your head? What were the teammates experiencing? How do you overcome such a tragedy?
Well, for me, I was 18 years old at the time when Len Bias died, and I was awakened, the night that he passed, I was awakened by one of my teammates, and I'm sorry, so people can't hear me. Yeah, you can't hear me in the back? Okay, I'm sorry, I apologize. as I said, I was 18 years old when Len Bias died. I was a freshman on the team. And I was awakened by one of my freshman teammates, David Gregg, who was actually one of the guys in the room who was partying. And so he said that, Lenny had collapsed and nobody knew what was going on and that they had taken him to the hospital. So we all obviously rushed down to the hospital. And this is like maybe, 5:15 a.m., in the morning. The sun's barely up. And so we're all still, obviously foggy because we're waking up, out of a sleep in a panic. If you have anybody wake you up out of a sleep, kind of screaming and yelling, that kind of throws you off just on its own. And so, I got in the car with one of my other teammates, and the rest of us, we all rushed down to leave. And we get there, and we're there maybe, a half hour before Lenny's mom comes in, and we're all sitting in the waiting room. And she immediately goes to the back, and then she's back there maybe, 35, 40 minutes, tops. And then she comes out of the back, and we're just kind of all sitting there just anticipating, her telling us that, oh, yeah, it was something that he ate. He had a bad reaction, or he had an asthma attack. We didn't know. We just knew that, our teammate and, friend was, in the emergency room. So when she came out, she looked, she came out, closed the door behind her. She looked at us and she said, he's gone. And she didn't have any tears in her eyes. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't frantic. She was nothing that you would expect a mother to be who just found out that her, 22-year-old son has just passed. And so I've never seen anything like it, to this day. And we all, like, just obviously as his teammates, we were, we just total pandemonium in the emergency room at that point, because all of us are there now at that point. There's like 12, guys on the basketball team, and we're all shocked to hear what just happened. And so for, for us, for me, it took days for me to really come to grips with that because it didn't feel real. I don't have any brothers or sisters. I'm an only child, so I've never really, outside of like, my granddad, who was 85 years old when I was 6 years old, when he died, I hadn't really experienced death. I lost some cousins, into car accident or whatever, but I had never lost anyone that I was that close to, outside of the family. And so that was devastating for me and the rest of my teammates, particularly as, 18-year-old and losing your idol, not just a teammate, not just a friend, not just somebody you knew. And that was the sentiment throughout this entire area. Nobody else in this area outside of the guys on the University of Maryland basketball team actually played with Len Bias, outside of his high school teammates, but the entire DMV area felt that. And it resonated like you could not believe, no internet, no social media or anything like that at the time. It just resonated countrywide. And so for us, it was literally a nightmare. And to make matters worse, it was the stigma that was attached to his death that the rest of us had to deal with. We were not doing drugs. We didn't know anything about what was going on. We literally had no clue. And that's a story that I still clarify with people to this day, because people will still look at guys who played at the University of Maryland with the kind of raised eyebrow, like, yeah, you were probably doing, A, B, C, and D. The answer is no, we were not. The people who were doing what they were doing, they were all in that room. And the rest of us, we found out the same way that the rest of the world found out. And the difference was we just had to live with the stigma that was attached to that. So that was not easy. And that's what Walt is talking about when he's talking about the fearlessness that he developed. Now, he developed that as a guy that was 2 years removed from the incident. So for guys like me and my teammates, my freshman and sophomore and junior teammates who were on the team at the time, we developed that same type of resolve. You call it the shell, where nothing on the outside gets to you. And when you're dealing with something, we had a bunch of guys, we all talked about transferring and leaving the University of Maryland and trying to leave this tragedy behind. And we got together and we soon realized that no matter where we go, you can't run from this. And if you go to another school, I thought about transferring. And the one thing I talked about with my parents, I said, if I leave and I go to another school, I'm gonna be that guy, that one guy on campus that played with Lenny, and those same question marks that everybody had about all of us, it would just be now, you individually. So we all stayed together and we went through it as a family. And then Walt comes because of, not in spite of. He came because of Len Bias. And there would later be other guys who would come. Juan Dixon would come because of Len Bias. Chris Wilcox, Lonnie Baxter, Steve Blake, the guys who would eventually win a national championship. And we'll talk about how Lenny influenced that as well. I'll let Walt take it from here.
Well, yeah, for me, I mean, I was a junior in high school, so, man, I just remember crying a whole lot, hearing it on the radio and turning on the TV. And I remember Keith Gavin walking across that glass door. It was a nightmare. It was devastating. And yeah, that was probably the day I knew that I was going to the University of Maryland. I wanted. I started hearing the things that was being talked about, and I just wanted, like I said earlier, I just wanted the country to know differently. I wanted them to know what I saw in the University of Maryland, and that one incident didn't define who he was or University of Maryland. He did so much. Len Bias did so much for the community and opening our eyes. I know for me personally, it wasn't publicized where people were from as much as it is now when you're watching games. So for me, when I would watch basketball games, I had no idea that I could be an NBA player. I just thought that happened to people from somewhere else. I didn't know it was a reality until I saw Len Bias. And so he inspired me. I started to realize that, okay, yeah, I can do these things. And he was the reason why I went to the University of Maryland. I didn't have this thought in my mind that, I need to play at a Division I school in the grand scheme of things. I had no idea. All I knew is that, that guy right there was incredible, and he went to the University of Maryland. So yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. This guy went to the NBA. He's drafted in. Okay, then that's what's next. And so he put that into my mind. Like, it wasn't this great thing that I had to go accomplish. It was just the next thing. And he made that reality for me. And so that's the type of thing that inspired me to be a part of this and want to write this book, because he was much more than the stats on the basketball court and the circumstances surrounding his death. There was much more to him than that. He had much more of an impact than that. You look at the University of Maryland, the direct impact of his death was more attention to academic support for these student athletes. That in turn, you start to see an increase in the graduation rate of student athletes as a whole. And so in his death, it was sort of like a rebirth of the University of Maryland, this academic program. And you see it prospering to this day. But the ground floor was him. Many people credit me with, Coach Williams and the championship years and things like that. But before me was Len Bias. And so he was the one who inspired me. And then you had, Coach Williams, who started recruiting locally with Dwayne Simpkins, Johnny Rose, X-Rehip. That led to, a championship with Juan Dixon, Lonnie Baxter, those guys. But it all started with Len Bias. He was the ground floor of it all. And so I recognized that very early on. Like I said earlier, I recognized that the University of Maryland was a dream school for me because of him. And I wanted to leave that impression on the youth coming behind me.
Good. Thank you all for sharing that. I think the audience enjoyed hearing that. So talking about the book, because we want you all to read it and, and purchase it. I've seen some of you all purchase it, yeah, and put it up there. There's another chapter in the book, fast forward, talking about the league is the name of the chapter. And so we want to talk about, leaving University of Maryland and then being drafted in the NBA and can you give us some of that experience? What was that like, playing the league?
Well, for me, I came out first. I'm 2 years older than Walt. Walt didn't come out until 1992. I came out in 1990. And as a guy who was still attached to the legacy of Len Bias, Pro Scouts were skeptical about me. I was an all ACC performer at the University of Maryland under some pretty bad circumstances, having played for 3 different coaches and years after Len Bias' death. The one thing that Walt and I, we talk about and we try to get the point across is that we know how Lenny died and we know what happened at the University of Maryland afterwards. But as far as for him and I, the way we got to the pros, that experience at Maryland is what forged us into NBA players. And me in particular, because for me to have the stigma as one of Len Bias' teammates, that turned a lot of people off. Now, during my time at the University of Maryland, I never, let alone done cocaine, I never even smoked a joint, I never did anything at the University of Maryland. But that didn't stop Pro Scouts from asking me, did I use drugs, cocaine in particular. And so these were things that, again, the stigma that's attached to that. So I used that time at the University of Maryland, particularly the year that I set out. I came to the University of Maryland in 1985, 86, played that 1 year with Lenny, and then upon his death in June, I set out the next season. I had to deal with my academics, and the word mental health did not exist at that time. So when something happened, like, your teammate died, and everybody knows, and they're looking at you crazy, we didn't really have a lot of options. There wasn't like somewhere we could go. And unfortunately, during that time, we know what the war on drugs was about. And for young Black men, there were not a lot of options, not a lot of places to turn when you had to deal with something like that. So for me, I turned to the gym. I turned to the weight room, and I turned to the basketball gym. And for a year, I wasn't on the team the following year. I routinely worked out. My friends were football players. Like, that's the kind of way it is sometimes in school. Your boys are the guys on the basketball team and the football team, because a lot of the football players want to be basketball players. So they all want to, we would all hang out together and like the whole thing. So those were my guys. And that 1 year, I dedicated myself to being getting as close to Len Bias greatness as I could. I worked on my body. I worked on my game constantly. I was in the gym at 12 at midnight, sometimes at 2 o'clock in the morning, because a lot of times I couldn't sleep, and so I constantly worked out that year. And the following season, when I was eligible to play the next season, I had grown and inched and gained 15, 20 pounds, and was a different player than the freshman that everybody saw when I came back my sophomore year. And so now we have a new coach in Bob Wade at that time as well. Bob Wade is the one who was responsible for bringing Walt Williams to the University of Maryland. A lot of people don't know that, but Bob Wade is the guy that got Walt Williams to Maryland. And so Bob Wade also, a lot of people don't know this, we also, within the 3 years that he was there, remember, Len Bias died on June 19th, 1986. During the 1987-88 season, we had a team that literally had, what was the way there was 7 McDonald's All-Americans? 7 McDonald's All-Americans. Bob Wade had brought in about 3 of them on his own, and we had guys that were also there. One of those guys was the late Brian Williams, known as Bison Dele. And they just did a special on him. A lot of people don't know that he actually played his freshman year at the University of Maryland, another NBA player. So we had a great team in 1987, '88, and that team made to the NCAAs less than 2 years after the biggest tragedy in the history of college basketball. We were back in the NCAAs, which was somewhere that nobody saw us being anytime soon. So we had a great team, and you know, we had some success. Ultimately, you know, some things were happening. Bob Wade would be fired. But for me, getting an opportunity to play for Gary Williams my senior year and Bob Wade got fired, playing for those three different coaches, playing under the circumstances that I had to with the scrutiny, and feeling like I had to do more than what the other guys at the other schools in the ACC were doing. You know, I was watching guys who, you know, I was given the business to, meaning as a player, meaning, okay, this guy's not better than me, but these guys are going in the first round. And I'm not being talked about as somebody in the first round, but statistically, my stats are better than pretty much, you know, a lot of the big guys in the ACC at that time. So I understood what was happening and that I'm going to have to work a little bit harder, you know, the people. So when I was fortunate enough to be drafted in the second round by the San Antonio Spurs, I had one thing on my mind. You know, when I got there, I requested, you know, I wanted to request a number 34. But upon finding out that Terry Cummings, who was a veteran player, he had already had that number, because it was my intention to wear the number 34 for my entire career, to represent Len Bias. I played 13 years. I got the opportunity to wear that jersey number only twice. I wore it in Sacramento, and I wore it with the San Antonio Spurs. My second go round, I got drafted by the Spurs in 1990. I played for 11 teams over the course of a 13-year NBA season. And the 15th year of my career, the 15th year, because I played 2 years in Europe as well. The 15th year of my 13 years in the NBA, I got called back to San Antonio by the San Antonio Spurs, and that number was available. And I wore that number 34 my last season in the NBA, and I ultimately won a championship with the San Antonio Spurs. So when you talk about the inspiration and what basketball was like in the league level, I was always, for all 15 years, even during my time in Europe, I was powered by Len Bias's legacy, the work ethic. You know, we'll talk about how Walt and I will come back to the University of Maryland and organize the pickup games. Again, inspired by Len Bias.
So yeah, you know, you asking about the highs and the lows of the NBA. So I remember my mother used to say, we used to have this little go-go bands in my basement. We used to practice in my basement, right? And so they used to have these variety bags of potato chips and stuff, and I used to, you know, give it around to my friends and everything. My mother used to go, "Hey, I'm going to the grocery store next Wednesday." So, you know, that's when I'm going. If all the food is gone before then, that's what you have.
Right. Nothing.
So sometimes we'd go into the grocery store and she'd go to the left to get the groceries. And she'd tell me to go to the right and get a pair of tennis shoes. Out the grocery store. So there were no lows going to the NBA. Right? There were no lows. I got to tell my mom, you know, you don't have to work no more, you know, and things like that. So it was all highs for me. Anything that wasn't, you know, like I said earlier, we figure out a solution and how we gonna get a good answer out of this, you know. And so that's the way I just looked at everything, you know, especially you know, going through the experience that I had been through. You know, we've been talking about Len Bias, but just other things in our lives. You know, my father, he had passed right when I was going to the NBA, so he never got a chance to see me play in NBA. You know, and so, you know, just wearing all these things, and you know, I always remember. You know, I read this thing one time. It said, My will shall shape my future. Whether I fail or succeed shall be no man's doing but my own. I can I can clear any obstacle that's in my path, or I can succumb to it. But it's my choice, it's my responsibility. You know, win or lose, only I hold the key to my destiny. And so those are words I live by, and I just try to work my tail off and just get it done. And I always felt like you're just gonna have to figure out a way if it's not that easy, you know. So just to go back to what I said earlier, you know, I never looked at things like it was any lows for me. You know, it always was highs. And so I think, you know, my family gave me that, you know, and just so much support, you know, always, you know. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Can my family and friends, can I just stand up real quick? I'm sorry, I don't want to touch. Just real quick.
Will you stand up?
Yeah, I feel it back this is always been this way, you know. So how can I not go out there and just give you everything I got? And that's what my opponents, that's what they saw every time they saw me. They saw me coming at them with fearlessness, and I'm gonna come get you. I'm gonna come see what it's all about, you know, from that right there. And so that always was impactful for me.
Right. So glad the family is here and friends. You have family and friends here, Tom?
Yeah, but my family's down south.
Okay. Well, we want to acknowledge you
Yeah.
as well. All right. But the impact, I think that was the next thing we want to talk about, and you all alluded to it.
Mhm.
But what impact did you all, after everything happened, you know, what impact was made on young people today, or the young people that you know, met after everything? What can these young people take from
Well,
this story?
I can say this for a fact. During the time that I played, and I have a chapter about this in the book, I ran into a guy, a random guy in Boston. And I can't remember what he thinks, a lawyer or something like that. But he talked about the Len Bias law, and he talked about his impact on society, how it wasn't just about basketball. And when you look at it, you know, things changed when Len Bias died. Congress did some things that, you know, maybe they shouldn't have, but you know, or maybe they should have just gone about it in a different way. When you talk about mass incarceration and laws that were changed, and the difference between crack and powder cocaine, and you know, a lot of people don't understand how impactful that was on African Americans, on young men in particular. And you know, I had a policeman actually tell me that you know, when you think about what the laws were for possession of cocaine versus the possession of a couple of grams of crack, and the difference between crack and cocaine. He asked me, "Do you know what the difference is?" And I said, "No, I don't." He said, "The difference is baking soda." So baking soda can make the difference between you know, getting probation and a mandatory, you know, minimum 10 years. So things like that came up out of the Len Bias tragedy, because it happened here in the area, and Congress felt pressure to do something. As far as young people, I've also had a lot of people come to me, and you know, during the time that it happened, and you know, during my pro career, and even up to today, saying that up until Lenny died from an overdose, they weren't aware that you could actually OD. People didn't know until it happened to someone prominent, and not just someone prominent, but someone elite, physically and status-wise. And so it set off a bell to people who were, quote unquote, on the wrong path, and realized how dangerous it was. So again, back to Ms. Bias's quote, Lenny touched more people in death than he ever could have in life. And that includes young people. So I think for somebody like myself, and I can't speak for Walt on this, but as a professional athlete, as someone in the public eye, as someone who everybody sometimes knows who you are, but you don't know who they are, and you don't know who you can trust, you find yourself in some situations You find yourself at parties that you thought were cool, and then, you look around somewhere and somebody's got some cocaine. All right, time for me to go. That was the lesson. Maybe I hang around at that party because I don't know. Not because I was into drugs, but just because I just maybe not known and maybe didn't think it was that bad what they were doing. But you can both best believe whenever I found myself in a situation like that, and I did find myself in situations like that, I was out the door. So if I don't go through what I went through at the University of Maryland, then maybe I'm tempted to try the drug, as so many people are. But that kept me away forever. And anybody that I come across, I discourage them, from going that route. So I pass on a positive lesson from something that was tragic. I also believe that one incident, particularly when it's an accident, that's not the way your life should be defined. Your life cannot be defined in how you die. It should be defined in how you live. So, would we have looked at the University of Maryland and Len Bias the same way had he died in a car accident? I don't think so. So, it is about, what you do afterwards. And for us, it was just about buckling down. And for me, representing Lenny, the guy that I knew, that's what it was for me. And I was going to do that by the way that I played. And I talk about how hard I worked that year I set off. I was chomping at the bit during that time that I was working out, to get back. And when my sophomore year came, I had a breakout game, the first game I had played in a year and a half, actually, because Bob Wade made me sit out an additional semester, even though I was eligible. But he made me sit out an additional semester, which I didn't want to, but, he had his reasons for doing it. So that just fueled me even more. And when I finally got back, we were playing against the University of South Carolina, who was actually a ranked team and was supposed to beat us that night. And I was in the starting lineup, kind of a secret a little bit because people didn't know really the jump that I had made from my freshman year to my sophomore year. And I came out and played my first game with nothing but Len Bias on my mind. I had not touched the University of Maryland basketball court in an official capacity since the death of Len Bias. So when I stepped on the court a year and a half later as a sophomore, I led the team in scoring and rebounding, and we won that game that night. We upset a ranked team. And so, that entire night, I had Len Bias on my mind. And I was doing my best, rendition of him. And that fueled me for the rest of my college career. So when I talk about Lenny, it's not just about basketball. I talk to young people about life and decision making and how, you don't always know everything that you think you know. And you can't always listen to an adult that's been in a situation and that knows, how these things can sometimes turn out.
Thank you. I just want to say we're coming down to a close, and I want, Walt, you have the last say. But I hope that this was a great opportunity for you all to get new Len Bias. A lot of stigma and a lot of things around you people don't know. But when you have the opportunity to hear firsthand, it makes all the difference. So, Walt, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, you probably can hear it in my voice. It's just tough for me to talk about, man. He was everything to me. He was Superman. And, for me, I just watched him play, and I saw the dominance there, right? And so when I made my decision to come to the University of Maryland, that's the decision I was making. I was making a decision and learning what I needed to do to be dominant. And, by the time it came to my senior year, I was in the right frame of mind where I needed to be. I went into that season just very confident and wanting to prove things. And, as a result, I had, I set many scoring records that year in terms of, consecutive 20-point games, 30-point games, points per game average, all of these things, the records that hold to this day. you know, and you know, I just think about the impact that Len Bias had, and like I said, it's just difficult for me to talk about. I mean, even though this was in 1986, my goodness, for Pete's sakes, that was a long time ago. But he was just like I say, he was just everything to me. And what stood out to me, what I recognize is that when he would step on the court, I mean, he was so aggressive, he was so intimidating. He just went after you. And then after the game, when he would get interviewed, he had a humbleness about him, and that stood out to me. And if you notice, any of these kids that come from this area that are dominant players, you know, before they become the superstars, whatever, they have that characteristic. They're dominant. They're very humble in the way they go about things, maybe soft-spoken, but they're tenacious when they step on that court. You know, and that's all of that Len Bias in us. You know, and so the impact, but the specific impact Len had on me was just that, you know, being able to be dominant, but also being humble about it, but also understanding that your decisions can impact you for the rest of your life, you know, and sometimes it can impact the people who love you for the rest of their lives, you know, and that meant a lot. That probably was the most, that probably was the biggest impact, or the biggest thing I took away from his death is that your life don't only affect you, it affects the people who love you too.
Well, I want to say thank you both for being here today. Can you all help me? For sale, lessons from Lenny. You can also find some copies in our system to check out. And we would hope that this book, Lessons from Lenny by Tony Massenburg and Walt Williams, will become a book that we talk about with our families, with our young people, talk about decision making, talk about that impact. What do you want to leave? What legacy, young man, young woman, do you want to leave? Let's talk about these things. Thank you all again for coming tonight.
If you're interested in getting a book signed, we're going to do a line right here. We have these 2 books for sale. The rest are sold out. So thank you all so much. Thank you. You don't mind this?